you so much, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Krishna Avila. I'm from an organization called the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. I'm an attorney there. Also, I used to be an organizer before I was an attorney. I was undocumented, so I was part of the many thousands of undocumented youth at that time who fought for DACA. So it's good to be here and to present on this topic today. So we have a packed agenda, so we're actually not going to take any questions, but if you do have a question, you'll have a chance to speak with an attorney or a legal advocate at 4 p.m. So this hour is just to give you a run through on what DACA is and the different documents that you need to submit in order to apply for DACA. So first, I'm going to quickly talk about what's happening with DACA now that we have a new president, President Biden. Then I'll go into the details of what documents you need to submit with your initial DACA applications. Then I'll briefly talk about what's called advanced parole, which is basically the what you get when you're trying to travel abroad with DACA. And then lastly, Jorge from Mission Asset Fund will talk a little bit about how if you need help paying for your DACA application, you can go to their organization to do that. All right, so first let's try to understand what DACA looks like under this new president. Um, so as many of you know, DACA has actually gone through a lot of obstacles. There were a lot of legal lawsuits, meaning that people try to end DACA in the courts. Um, but fortunately, right before Biden was elected, the government was forced to open up DACA fully. So now what that means is that they're now accepting initial DACA applications. And in fact, many people have already applied for DACA for the first time, and we already know of applications that have been accepted already. So that's good to know. Um, Also, we wanted to mention that there are going to be some changes possibly in the future. For example, we saw that on the first day that President Biden came into office, he signed an order basically telling the government to what's called preserve and fortify DACA. So it's very broad and vague, but we expect some changes to DACA in the future. Hopefully it's going to be positive. So that, I mean, that language itself means that it's asking the government to protect DACA and to hopefully make it better. Um, we also know that there's some lawsuits that are still pending. In Texas, there is a lawsuit right now that is challenging DACA. So we're waiting on an outcome of that case. So all of that is to say that there could be some more changes in the future to DACA. But I think where we can take a breath is knowing that, a lot of people were worried when Trump was around, should I submit my DACA application? But now under Biden, and after seeing that, again, that some initial DACA applications have been accepted already, we can be safe. We can take a breath and know that the information in the DACA applications, there's actually policies to protect that information from being used for deportation purposes. So there's a lot of laws and policies that protect that information, not only about you as an applicant, but also, some questions are around your parents, so we know that all of that information about you and your parents are protected, so they can't use that against you for deportation purposes, and we haven't seen that happening at all. So you should feel safe to submit your DACA applications. All right, so now let's get into it. So obviously, when you're applying for DACA, especially for the first time, there's a lot of documents that you need. You basically have to tell the government that you qualify for DACA. So what does that mean? Well, on this screen, you can see that there's different requirements. Um, so you have to prove different eligibility criteria. So the first one is you have to prove that you were under the age of 31 on June 15, 2012, which is when DACA was implemented. So that basically means that in order to be eligible for DACA, you have to have been born after June 15 of 1981. So that's one requirement. Another requirement is that you have to prove that you came to the United States before your 16th birthday. Um, Another requirement is that and this, I think this is the most kind of tedious for a lot of people to show that they have been continuously residing in the United States since June 15 of 2007. And we'll get into the details about what all this means in a little bit. So this is just an overview. Um, the fourth eligibility criteria that you see on the screen is that you have to also prove that you were physically inside of the United States on June 15, 2012. So that's when, again, DACA was implemented. So you have to prove that and also prove that you were obviously here when you're applying for DACA. So you can't apply for DACA outside of the United States. Um, you also have to prove that you were undocumented on June 15 of 2012. So if you had a visa or some other form of lawful status, unfortunately, you're not eligible for DACA, but most of you are probably undocumented, so you don't have to worry about that. Um, there's some educational requirements, as many of you know. So you have to prove that you're either currently in school, that you have graduated or obtained a high school diploma or similar diploma, or that you have obtained a GED certificate. Then there's another criteria that you can meet under which you can meet the educational requirement, which we'd rarely see, but for those that have been honorably discharged from the Coast Guard or Armed Forces of the United States. And then lastly, you also, unfortunately for some people, there are some criminal conviction or criminal offenses that would bar you from getting DACA, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then lastly, you have to submit a $495 fee for the application. All right, so just before we get into the actual evidence, just wanted to say two things. About the evidence that you'll be submitting that's very important, that applies to all. First is that you don't have to submit originals. So you could submit copies of everything that we're going to be talking about. In some cases, the government comes back and tells you that they want to verify that what you're submitting is actually real. So they will ask for originals. But when you're first applying, we ask everyone to just get copies of the original documents that you're submitting. And then also importantly is that if there's any documents that you're submitting that are in different languages, so for example, birth certificates or passports, or not passports, but birth certificates is a common one, you definitely want to have those documents translated. So you're obviously going to submit the copy of the birth certificate, for example, but you will also be submitting an additional Word document that's translating everything that's written in the birth certificate as well. So keep those in mind as you're gathering your evidence. All right, so let's go over the first requirement, which is age. So again, in order to be eligible for DACA, you had to have been under the age of 31 on June 15 of 2012. And you also have to prove that you came to the United States under the age of 16. Um, Besides those, you also, in order to actually apply for DACA, you have to be at least 15 years old when you're applying. So for people who are, generally speaking, people who are 14 or 13, um, even though you technically meet the criteria, you're under the age of 31 on June 15, 2012, and you obviously came to the United States under the age of 16, you still have to wait until you're 15 years old in order to submit your application. However, though, there are a few exceptions. So when you can apply before you're 15 years old, and that's when one, you're in deportation proceedings, so you're going to immigration court, and so you are currently there. That's one exception where you don't have to wait until you're 15 years old. Another exception is that you already went through deportation proceedings, so you already went to court, and they already ordered you removed. So you have a final order of deportation, or you got voluntary departure. So those are the two instances of when you can apply without having to wait until you're 15 years old. And then lastly, for either of those, you have to not be in immigration detention, which I think for all of you, this doesn't apply. All right, so how do you prove age? So actually, when you're applying for DACA, you have to prove that your identity, obviously. They want to know that you are who you say you are. So that's why we lump these two together, proving your age and your identity. So the most common way to do this is to get your passport, to submit a passport because it has your photo identification and it has obviously your date of birth. So that covers both your identity and your age. Um, if you don't have a passport, you can contact the consulate of your country, and depending on what country you're coming from, the process is different. But generally, they're open. They have ways to make reservations so that you can go get your passport um, in order to use that as evidence of age and identity. But if you can't get your passport, there are other ways of proving your age and identity. Another way is to submit a birth certificate. Um, and really important is that if you do submit a birth certificate, if you don't have your passport, you still have to submit another photo identification, unfortunately, because a lot of times birth certificates don't have any photos, or the birth certificate photos is obviously of us as babies. So they want to see a more current picture. So that's the reason why if you do submit a birth certificate, you have to submit another form of ID that has your photo. So what can those documents be? Well, they also accept any form of ID from your country. So if you have an ID from Mexico, for example, that has your picture and your date of birth, then that they will allow you to submit that as well. Um, if you have any US documents, they also accept those. So for example, here in California, you can get your driver's licenses, even if you don't have any formal lawful status. So that obviously a driver's license has your photo ID and has your date of birth. So you can submit that. You can also submit if you had employment authorization from the government, maybe you did, or expired visas that say um, the same information again, your date of birth and it has your photo. You can submit those as well. They also accept school IDs. So again, if you don't have your passport or you don't have a birth certificate, you can also submit your school ID. And of course, the school ID has to have your photo. And then also military ID, they accept as well, but I think many of us don't have that. And important to say that that's not all, those are just some examples. And you can talk to your attorney or your legal advocate in a little bit to see if you don't have any of these, how else they can help you to prove age or identity. All right, so that was one requirement. So now the second requirement again is that you also have to prove that you came to the US before you were 16 years old. A lot of times you can prove this if you came lawfully, if you came with a visa, for example, you can show that your passport, and you can show, a lot of times they just stamp it with a date. So that's one way that you can prove that you came to the country before you're 16. Another way is what's called the form I-94. So these are the forms that immigration agents usually give when, again, you're coming in lawfully, either at the port. Um, yeah, at the port they usually give. It's usually a white card that gives the arrival time and or the arrival date. So that's another way of proving that you came before you're 16 years old. But obviously a lot of people didn't come lawfully, so how else can you prove this? Well, you can prove it in other ways. So for example, if you were in school, um, and the school record shows that you were here at a certain date, and then you show your passport that has your date of birth, well, those two together can prove that you were obviously here before you're 16 years old. Um, there's other ways too, hospital records, medical records, immunization records. So if you had vaccines that show the different dates, those are other ways, common ways of proving that you came before you're 16 years old. So you basically just have to show that you were inside of the United States before you were 16 in the different ways that you can. Um, So one thing for some people, I don't think a lot of people have to worry about this, but there are some people. So the purpose behind this requirement is that they are looking for people who actually came before they were 16 years old and were actually living in the country. So we do worry about people who came before they were 16 years old, only briefly, um, and then they went back to their home countries. So if that's the case, definitely flag that for your attorney, because we have extra evidence to prove. In that case, if you came before you're 16 years old and you actually just came briefly and then decided to go back, um, to your country and then came back after you were 16 years old, then you would have to show that you actually that resided in the United States before you're 16 years old. So you can do that by showing that you were in school again here in the United States, or that you're living here, showing your address, that your home was here in the US, or for those few of you who are working, you can show that you had employment here in the United States. But again, I think for most of you, you came before you're 16 years old and you basically stayed the entire time, so you don't have to worry about this. And this is just an example to give you. So for example, Alan entered the United States when he was 13 years old. His dad took him to Disneyland as a surprise. He was only in the United States for 4 days before he returned back to his home country. And then he came back after he was 16 years old. So he came back when he was 17 and has been here ever since. So unfortunately for this person, they would have to show that extra evidence that basically proving that their home was here in the United States and not in their home country. All right, so now let's talk about the most tedious requirement, which is again showing that you were continuously residing in the United States since June 15 of 2007. So for this requirement, you have to basically show that you were here in the United States since that time up until the time that you're applying for DACA. So for a lot of us, or for a lot of you, it's going to take some time to actually prove that, because those are many years. So that's a continuous residence requirement. And again, you also have to show that you're physically present inside of the United States on June 15 of 2012. Um, for that, obviously, it's better if you can show that you're physically here on that exact date, but the government is pretty liberal with that. So if you can show that you're inside of the United States around that time, Usually we like to say like within 30 days or so of June 15, either before or after, then usually we see that they accept it. So it doesn't have to be evidence of you actually being there on that specific date, although that is obviously better. Um, you also obviously must not be unlawful, or you must have been unlawfully present, basically that you weren't documented on June 15 of 2012. So you couldn't have anything. You couldn't have a visa, for example, that was still valid. You had to have been undocumented. And obviously for that, for most of you who were undocumented, you don't have to prove that you were unlawful on that time. So that's irrelevant for you. So those are the residence requirements. Residence and all right. So for continuous residence, so again, like I said, you have to prove that you have been residing in the United States since June 15 of 2007. Um, we try to let folks know that they should be looking for evidence for every 3 months since June 15 of 2007. And when your attorney or legal advocate will talk to you in a little bit, they'll guide you through a package that you'll receive after your consultation, which nicely divides up every 3 months since June 15 of 2007. So you have to be proving that you were here. So I'll show you some evidence that you can use to prove that in a little bit. But if you can't find, if like there is a gap, a 3 month gap, for example, that you really cannot find any evidence that you were here in the United States, then in those cases, you can use letters from someone other than yourself to write that you were here on those dates. So it's basically letters from, it could be community members, it could be family members sometimes, or teachers that are writing like, hey, like, I know for a fact that this person was here in the United States during this time. Um, and so they do accept that if you only have gaps. Obviously you cannot use, like someone writing a letter just to say, hey, I know that this person was here from June 15 2007 up until now. No, you can only use letters if you have little few gaps that you want to fill in since June 15 of 2007. And again, you'll receive a checklist on this after your consultation. So it'll help you to gather your evidence in that way. So here is some common evidence that you can submit to prove your continuous residence and physical presence. The most common is school records. So we've had a lot of people who have gone back to their schools and gotten transcripts, attendance records, anything that can show from your school that you were here again since June 15 of 2007 is helpful. I think so. The process to get school records depends on the school. So each school is different. So you would have to contact your school directly. If it's been a while since you've graduated, then you probably will have to go to the actual school district instead to gather those school records. But that's one of the most common ways that you can prove, because a lot of times you've been in school for that entire time and transcripts show different dates, and often for a long period. So you could potentially prove um, your whole continuous residence just by using school records. But if you need more, you can also use medical records. You can go to your doctor and you can, like I mentioned, vaccination records or any records that they can show with your name on it that you were here on certain dates. Those are also ways that you can prove that. Employment records, if you were working, tax receipts. So a lot of times if you're filing taxes, or if your parents were filing taxes and they included you in those taxes, you can use those tax receipts to as evidence that you were here. rent receipts, utility bills, really anything that you can show, that you can think of. Um, I won't go over all of this, but sometimes you can also use, if you if you had your baptism or your first communion from your Catholic church or whatever, you can also go to your church and get those documents. So just be as creative as possible. Copies of money orders or receipts. So anything again that you can think of, like try to gather as much evidence as you can to show them that you were here since June 15th of 2007. And then just wanted to warn that obviously you do want to speak to your attorney or legal advocate if you have traveled outside of the United States without advance parole, because that if you have traveled since June 15th of 2012 um, without advance parole, that could raise some problems. So you want to just make sure to flag that for us when we're looking at your cases. Um, And again, to show that you were unlawful on June 15th of 2012, for some people, they did come lawfully, so they came with a visa. So for those folks, that you do have to show that it was expired, that it expired by June 15th of 2012. So one way to do that is again, showing what's called the I-94, which is a form that you usually get when you come into the country at a port. So that would show, that it's valid. For example, here on this screen, this I-194 is valid until July 10th, 1993. So obviously it expired before June 15th of 2012. But again, for many of you who are undocumented, you don't need to show that you entered unlawfully. So you don't have to worry about this requirement. And so now let's talk about the educational requirement. So again, the educational requirement, there are 4 ways to prove that. So the first one is that someone graduated from high school. So if you already graduated from high school, you automatically meet the educational requirement. But say that you haven't graduated already, so someone or you didn't go to high school, you can also meet the educational requirement by showing that you passed what's called a GED, so the General Educational Development Exam, or another similar exam. So for example, there's what's called a high set or a task exam that's similar, that you can also go and you can pass that exam and show that as evidence. Third, you can also currently be in school. So you didn't you're currently in high school, or you're currently enrolled in a GED program, or you're currently in college. So you can show the educational requirement that way by showing that you're currently enrolled in school. And then fourth, which is less common again, is that for those few that were in the Coast Guard or Armed Services of the United States and they were honorably discharged, they don't have to show the educational requirement. So those are the ways that you can prove the education requirement. So how can you prove that? Well, if you're currently in school, I think that's the most, I think, common way. So you can show that you were accepted, if especially if you didn't complete your high school, for example, you can go back and enroll and you can show that you were accepted to that school. So it doesn't have to be that you have started school already. Currently in school can mean that you were just enrolled and were accepted. So you can show a letter from your program with your name and address of the program and the name of obviously you, um, the current grade level, and your date of enrollment. Other ways, you can show your current class schedule. So if you haven't started school, but you have your class schedule already, you can show that. transcripts, school registration cards, report cards, or progress reports. Anything that can show that you're currently enrolled in school is is sufficient.
Mm.
And then lastly, there are, I mentioned some criminal bars, so we won't go over this in detail today, but just to give, just to let you know, people who have one felony, one significant misdemeanor, or any misdemeanor with more than a 90-day sentence, um, or three or more non-significant misdemeanors, or otherwise pose a threat to national security or public safety. So those people are barred from getting DACA. But I think for you all, since we won't go into detail with this, just if you've ever had contact with law enforcement, if you've ever been arrested, with or you ever yeah, have you ever been arrested or had contact with police officers, definitely just flag that for your attorney or legal advocate so they can try to assess whether this is an issue for you getting DACA. And then, so if that's the case, then they'll help you figure out a way to get background records so that they can fully assess whether the offense that you committed, if you did commit one, um, is if matches one of those. So if it's a felony, misdemeanor, or non-significant misdemeanor. Okay, cool. So really quickly before I pass it to Jorge to talk about Mission Asset Fund, I just want to talk about advanced parole since I know many of you might have questions about this. So this is what you could apply for once you get DACA. So this doesn't apply to those of you who don't have DACA already. So this is a benefit that you get once you actually get approved for DACA. So right now, we have seen the government grant advanced parole for people with DACA. So what is advanced parole? Is basically asking the government for advanced permission to be able to go abroad, but unfortunately, under DACA, they only allow it for three different purposes. So one is humanitarian purpose. So that includes anything from obtaining medical treatment, for example, if you need to go to a doctor and you can't get your treatment here in the United States and you have to go abroad, that's one reason that could fall under humanitarian. Another is if you would, and the most common, I think, is if you want to attend a funeral service, you know, if you have a grandpa or grandma who has died or actually hasn't died but is currently ill and you want to go visit them, or any family members. We also heard of uncles and aunts that are sick and you want to go visit them. That could be one way of traveling under humanitarian. So that's humanitarian. Another way that we commonly saw before is an educational purpose. So say that, you know, your school has a study abroad program at your country. I know in Mexico, for example, you can actually, there's a program through the consulate that you can apply for it and you can go and study in different states in Mexico. So that those are kind of one way of meeting the educational purpose. Another purpose is employment. So say that there's a conference for your job, or if you want to meet, you know, like your job says, hey, we think that it's you'll get extra skills by attending another this conference abroad. That could be another reason that you can go and meet the employment purpose. So in order to apply for advanced parole, you have to fill out another form that's separate from DACA, which is the form I-131, and you have to submit a $575 fee. So unfortunately, it is kind of pricey. Um, and again, you have to also submit evidence for that you meet the humanitarian, educational, or employment purpose. So some common examples for humanitarian is letters from doctors, you know, say that you want to go visit a sick family member. Well, a lot of times you would be submitting a letter from a doctor that's looking after your family member, to let them to prove that that family member is actually sick. Um, For educational purpose, you can submit evidence such as like the study abroad brochures or programs or acceptance letters, things like that. For employment, you can submit letters from your employer or again, conference programs, information about those. So those kind of things. But again, you do have to submit evidence that the reason why you're um, traveling abroad is under humanitarian, educational, or employment purpose. But and then lastly, before I hand it off, just want to say that although it is technically allowed, we actually caution people to travel right now for various reasons. Obviously, like I mentioned, DACA, right now we're still waiting on some lawsuits. So who knows what could happen if you leave the country and then DACA is terminated. We obviously don't want that to happen. Um, Also, some people have deportation orders, and although you're technically allowed to travel, even if you have a deportation order, that poses serious risks. If you do travel and then come back and then the immigration agent finds out that you have a deportation order, that could potentially bar you from coming back in. So we want to also caution against those sort of risks. And then lastly, some countries still have travel restrictions because of the pandemic. So you want to make sure that the country that you're going to, if you do decide to go to, that they actually allow you to go, or that if you need a COVID-19 vaccine or a test that shows that you're not or that you don't have COVID, then those are sort of things you have to also watch out for before going abroad. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Jorge.
Thanks, Krishna. I'm just going to take a second here to pull up my presentation, everyone. All right. Just a quick thumbs up to make sure they could see the deck itself. Perfect. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone. Krishna, thank you so much for that amazing walkthrough. My name is Jorge Contreras. I am the Partner and Client Services Director at Mission Asset Fund. Today, I'm going to review our DACA fee assistance program, as well as our entire immigration loan portfolio. During the presentation, I will review not just our immigration portfolio itself, the benefits of them, how they work, but also, and more importantly, how to apply. Just bear with me for a second. So just before we get started, I do want to introduce our, who is Mission Asset Fund, just to make sure that you know who we are. So we are a nonprofit based in the Mission District in San Francisco. We are in the mission to create a fair financial marketplace for every hardworking family. And before every presentation, we normally, we want to always start with, reviewing our core values, just to be, really intentional of like covering, like, letting you know what we value most and how we carry ourselves in terms of like how we design and also how we do our work. So with that, I want you all to know that, at heart, everything that MAF does is rooted in our community and our commitment to our community. And that commitment is best captured in 3 core concepts. So first of all, we meet clients where they are, not where society says they should be. And we build on what is good and true in their lives. We build on their strengths. And lastly, we respect the diverse communities that we serve. So, recognizing that there is strengths in our community that are often overlooked, we want to capture those strengths and build on what we know our community has to offer. So next, oh, there you go. So want to definitely go over now our immigration loans themselves. So at MAF, we do offer a variety of different credit building loans to support clients who are applying to specific immigration immigration proceedings. So to cover those filing fees. So for instance, we support clients that are going through the naturalization process, green cards, petition for relative, temporary protected status, TPS. And then naturally, while I'm here to talk to you, we also have a credit building loan product to support initial and renewal DACA applications. One thing that you should know, all of these programs are zero interest and they're credit building. And they all also come with access to free online financial education. So what do they look like? So definitely want to highlight a few things for you to keep in mind. So this is essentially our program's overview and the breakdown of what they look like. So these are all 10-month loan term. So what this means is, for instance, that DACA renewal fee that Krishna talked about, that $495. If you were to apply and get approved, you would simply make 10 installments of $49.50. But we do have thanks to our partnership with OSEA, we are offering a 50% match loan for anyone that has a meaningful connection to San Francisco. So by simply participating in today's workshop, you are eligible to receive this 50% match. So what this means is simply that if you were to apply for the DACA loan with us, you will receive a check that's made out to USCIS that's going to be attached to your application for $495. However, the loan that you'll have on our end will be simply for $247.50, which means that you'll pay just 10 installments of $24.75. Keep in mind that this is an opportunity that's available to anyone with a meaningful connection to San Francisco. As I mentioned, by simply participating in today's workshop, you're eligible. And it's also available thanks to our support with the Grow Foundation to anyone in the 9 Bay Area counties. So if you do have a relative, a friend, a neighbor that wasn't able to make it to today's presentation, and they live in one of the 9 surrounding Bay Area counties, they are eligible to also receive the DACA specific match loan. If for any reason you do find yourself in a position where a loan isn't an option for you, MAF is accepting DACA grant referrals from legal service providers. So please, when you are meeting with your attorney or legal service provider or advocate today, feel free to mention that that if you're not, if that's a situation that you find yourself in, and we'll provide instructions on how they could contact us on the grant opportunity. So how it works is relatively simple. So first you will apply to your DACA loan through our website. In a second, I'll walk you through how to do that. Once your application is approved, we will mail you a check to of the full amount, the full $495, that you'll then simply use to mail your application to USCIS. And then after that, you'll make simple installments once a month for the duration of your loan, and you're all set. So how to get started? First and foremost, you could always visit our website, missionassetfund.org. Definitely take a look at our immigration programs and just look at our specific immigration loan portfolio. You'll be able to apply on that homepage. You could also type in or use the bit.ly. It's simply bit.ly/MAF here to say. here to stay, which will take you to the the landing page itself. Those are, once you get to that page, you'll see the Apply Now button on the top left-hand corner. The website is in multiple languages, so you'll be able to find the language feature on the top right corner. So in case there is a language need, that's something that we definitely designed for as well. I do want to go over a couple of program requirements, just so you know what they are. So for the credit building loan program, you do have to be at least, the person that's applying has to be at least 18 years of age or older. So what this means, if you are applying for a DACA, an initial DACA, and you're under the age of 18, you can have a parent apply on your behalf. The second requirement is that the person applying for the loan will need to have access to their own personal email. All of our application process and the application itself is designed to be virtual. So using your tablet, mobile phone, or computer, you'll be able to submit your application. So for that, you will need, and we'll create an account for you. And to be able to do so, you'll need to have access to your own personal email address. You also need to have access to a valid photo ID. So we are really flexible in what we're able to accept as a form of identification. So as long as it's government issue ID that hasn't expired, you'll be able to use that as to meet this criteria. So think, if you do have your California ID, you can use a matricula, a passport, etc. So there is a lot of flexibility on what you could use to meet this criteria. So know that, if you ever have any questions on any of these items, by the way, I'll share our contact information. You're always welcome to reach out to us. We will, an additional requirement is access to your own checking account. All of the monthly contributions are debited electronically. This is designed for ease for all of our participants. So you won't need to worry about going to any specific site or location to make a deposit. These are automatically withdrawn. And lastly, there is an income requirement. There is a lot of flexibility in how to meet this criteria, but at the end of the day, we need to just make sure that the debt to income ratio is meets a certain threshold. That's it. So I do want to just remind you all, we are based in the Mission District. Unfortunately, our offices are currently closed. But you could always, if there is any question that you have on any specific program, you could always email us at programs@missionassetfund.org. You could call our number as well. It's here in front of your screen. But as I mentioned, once you are ready to submit your application, your DACA loan application, invite you to visit our landing page or to type in and visit us by using the bit.ly /math here to stay. With that, thank you all for having me. I'm going to stop sharing and hand the mic over to our friends at OSEA.
Thank you so much, Krishna and Jorge. That was really great. I think we do have a few minutes for questions. And I think my colleague Jamie recorded them. So Jamie, do you mind reading off the questions, and then we'll move towards the consultations at 4 o'clock.
Sure. I think most of them have been answered in the course of the presentation. But let me just reiterate, the first question we got was, so if I have a visa, I automatically can't qualify for DACA. I think that was answered by Krishna, but maybe we can reiterate.
Yeah, so the requirement for that again is that you have to have been undocumented on that date of June 15, 2012. So if you had any form of status of your visa was valid at that time, then you unfortunately do not qualify.
And the second question was answered in the chat, but I'm wondering if we can just answer it for the whole group in case someone missed it. But has there been any change of pace in the processing of applications with the new administration?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's too, I think it's too soon to notice, but what we can say is again that we have seen initial DACA applications at least being accepted, and those that have been that were submitted like in December were already approved. So it seems like it could change.
All right, and this one is for Jorge. Can Mission Asset Fund help someone apply for advance parole? I'm assuming that is related to the fee around advance parole.
It's something that we could talk about offline. For the most part, our immigration loan opportunities are for the 6 that we listed on our website. But always welcome to connect with us, and we could always explore. But for the most part, our credit building loans are for the 6 filing fees that we listed.
And another one for you, Jorge, is where can an undocumented minor get a checking account?
Yeah, excellent question. So we have seen that some credit unions do offer checking accounts for ITIN holders. So happy to share some resources that we've seen and have created to provide folks who are looking to become banked. But it is we have seen some credit unions that do offer a checking component, a program and product for ITIN holders.
Thanks. And this will be the last question. Can someone who is approved for an I-130 renew their DACA?
Yes. So you can have DACA while you're an approved I-130 just means that your application is approved by the government, but you don't actually have your green card yet. So you can still continue on and get your DACA in the meantime.
Great. I think those are all the questions that we have time to answer. And if folks have additional questions, they can ask them during their attorney consult.
Great, thank you, Jamie. And thank you so much, Krishna and Jorge. If we were in person, it would be like a really loud applause. So you can just like pretend that's really loud applause. Super helpful. This has been recorded. I think we can stop the recording now, Jamie, and we will send this out to those who